My name is Mohammed Ittefaq. I'm currently assistant professor at James Madison University School of Communication Studies. In terms of my title, where I am currently, how did I come here? And a kind of, I am originally from South Asia, Pakistan, the second largest country in the region. Uh, and In terms of my work, a little bit, I do research on environmental communication and climate change communication and health communication.
My name is Iccha Basnyat. I am currently at George Mason University. I went to Mason from James Madison University, but before that I was at the National University of Singapore for about 10 years. My work focuses on the intersections of gender and health inequalities, particularly looking at South Asia. I guess it took a long road, right, getting here, because I started in Singapore and then went to James Madison and then to George Mason. But it sort of comes together in the sense that I have a joint appointment now as a associate professor of global health communication. So I'm able to bring all of those pieces together where I am now.
Yes, that's an interesting question. Made me think about a lot of things. So, because the type of work I do in terms of the region I focus on, the issues I focus on, I think it has had a lot to do with overall the social justice movement for the goodness of the society. Overall, being more inclusive, being more just in our discipline, in our society. So my one of my works, which I talked more about climate justice issues, and talking more of the divide of the global north and the global south, and how the global southern countries are disproportionately affected more with the climate change, uh, while they are contributing less to the carbon emissions. So overall, talking about that work, focusing on the issues and the topics which have not been received much scholarly attention or much talk in the media or in the society or the debate overall in the policy making decisions. So all in all, focusing on the work which matters, focusing on the issues which are important to our society, and being more inclusive and open and critical to the ideas, critical to those issues which are paramount to our society. I think this is a way where I see my work contributing to more into a social justice movement.
Yeah, so for me, I would say, my work is rooted in social justice, partly because I am, right, by default, as a critical scholar, I guess we think of social justice into that. But for me, much more thinking about, changes that are working with in collaboration with communities. So most of my work is community-based work. Much of it has been in South Asia. Currently, having moved back to the US, working on reproductive health justice kind of projects in the context of the US. So there's always that focus of justice, but more so it's really focused on women and gender, and really thinking about what keeps us out from good healthcare access, good health outcome opportunities, and so I don't necessarily focus on a health issue as much as more of a from a societal perspectives, right? And all of it is with the idea of thinking about making changes that matter to the women who have almost always been at the margins, whether it's because of their gender, their race, their class, social locations, whatever it may be. So although I guess when I think about my work, I don't necessarily define it in terms of social justice, and partly I think it's because maybe I take it for granted in the sense that it's rooted into the work I do and how it stems some of the questions that I ask, the community I work with, and even working with the community, thinking about what is it that they want to see change, right? What matters to them, and how do we go about making those changes, not because, right, I understand from an academic sense or because I have access, but really for the lived experiences, thinking about the women and what matters to them. And so, so I think in that sense, I would say again, as, the way I started, right, kind of thinking about my work, being really centered at thinking about social justice.
That's a great question. As the theme of our talk is creeping crisis, we're talking more about health and environment. I'm focusing more on environment and climate change communication. While I was reading recently more on creeping crisis in terms of definition, more a little meaning is a crisis which evolve over time and does not kind of leave precursors, kind of like a hint that there's gonna be a disaster soon. So that this type of crisis like evolve over time, which takes maybe decades or centuries to come to a flashpoint, and maybe they don't have a beginning point or they don't have an ending point. It's just a crisis which is slowly developing, and some people like scientists or academicians or people who are in that domain can assess or predict to a certain extent. But it's a kind of crisis which is a different type than a normal crisis, and it can happen in any industry. For example, COVID-19 was a crisis, a creeping crisis in health. Climate change is one of the creeping crises, especially in the South Asian region right now, where over the last many decades, different factions of the society, like politicians, like news media, like academicians, like civil society, they did not realize that there would be a day soon that when we will be losing life just because of the heat waves. They didn't think about how the cyclones or wildfires or how these dengue viruses gonna be more rapid and more wild and more frequent. They didn't think about that. So like when I talk or think about my work as climate change communicator, I think about and I see those things happening, slowly evolving over time and slowly moving into kind of something which will engulf everything, which recently we saw, for example, in Pakistan 2023 when a flood hit and like almost 33 million people displaced. So, and a lot of lives lost, and a lot of like billions of dollars are gone worth of crops, animals, human life, infrastructure that was gone. So, the creeping crisis into a climate change right now, we see it like kind of almost every day. Somewhere there are floods, there are heavy rains, there are like kind of unpredicted, kind of weather changes. So this is how it has been happening in my field where I study and what I read and what I see in everyday society and in the literature. Yes, so South Asia has a very unique characteristics compared to the many other parts of the region. For example, it is inhabit kind of 800 million people into very small region, which is like kind of land wise is not huge, but population wise it's huge. Those countries consistently ranked higher to the vulnerability in a climate change risk index. Like, for example, India has 83 cities out of 100 which are more polluted than any other city in the world. For example, Nepal or Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Bangladesh, they have been ranked consistently among the top 10 countries which are more vulnerable. And when we think about the carbon emissions, what they are contributing to climate change is like kind of less than zero, less than like 1%. So when you think about the unique characteristics to this region, it has a lot of population. It's a very small region. It has a lot of Himalayas, mountains, and like glaciers. It's like highest number of glaciers in that region, and a lot of unique species in that region. So the vulnerability in terms of human health, in terms of loss of species, in terms of infrastructure, it's not developed. All of these countries are considered developing countries, like where the infrastructure is not very resilient compared to like if you think about Japan or the US or a lot of Western democracies. So this region is very unique in terms of the consequences and in terms of the contribution they make to what is happening as a human disaster when we think about climate change.
So, you mentioned the symposium tomorrow, and it connects to I think what I'm going to say, and really maybe slightly a different understanding of creeping crisis than what Muhammad just said, in the sense that to me, as a critical health comm scholar who's interested in really thinking about the space and role of global South and how that's not always been centered in the things, in the sense of understanding experiences, cultures, or even knowledge. That when I think of creeping crisis, and that's the argument that I'm going to make tomorrow, is that to me it's much more of an ideological and power relations, right, that is creeping within the context of health communication development, because it has been according to somebody else standard, according to, right, without thinking about some of the things that was just mentioned in terms of, right, issues of related to, right, not having access to healthcare, or having living in a polluted city, or all of those kind of things, right. Those do impact health in a negative way, but that again needs to be connected to a broader conversation of how we define those spaces, how we think about health, or how we think, we need to address something. So when I think of creeping crisis, it's not so much, right, again, going back to my earlier point about a particular health condition or a particular health illness, really, but more thinking collectively in a broader sense of marginalized spaces, of marginalization, of exclusion, erasures, that really is also part of the creeping crisis that only tells one side of the story, right? The story according to power, as opposed to stories according to lived experiences. And if those are not connected, it's often the case that we don't think of that space as having a crisis, right? It only becomes a crisis when it encroaches or impacts spaces of status quo or dominance or hegemony, where we think, okay, right, now we have a problem. And so for me, in that sense, I will define it and argue it as slightly differently than maybe how it's traditionally defined as a creeping crisis in the literature, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question in terms of when we think about not just writing research articles, publishing them, and keeping them into our desktops. It's more of engagement, more of a societal impact. Instead of thinking about the citations, it's more of like how is it generating conversations in the society, how is it informing the public policy making processes, specifically to those countries which always looked or have been, kind of influenced by the North, right? So, like, kind of thinking what they think that the only way to do things without any cultural context, without any political, socio-economic consequences. So, the role of a journalist, I think, sometime we think too much or maybe expect too much from journalism community to talk about these issues when those issues do not go well with the political economy of the media. So, like, kind of thinking about what brings the ad, what brings the virality of the content, what brings more engagement or conversations or generate controversies about things. So, in terms of like the role, the recent two studies I have done in environmental communication context and air pollution context in South Asia, we talked about communities of practice working collectively toward a goal, which is to make our societies better and making our healthy lifestyle and having more access to clean water and clean air. So, in terms of their role, they need to be kind of very vigilant and advocate strongly about these issues and commitments and hold powerful accountable, and holding these corporations accountable, asking critical questions, exploring and investigating issues which matter for the public good, which are like contributing to the overall well-being of the society, not just thinking about their journalistic institution, or sometimes it goes against the standard which we think about honesty and objectivity, or like these ideas we have in the journalism. Now, about the academicians, I think over the years there has been more calls on their role, kind of redefining their roles, kind of rethinking what we offer, what is the value we have in our society, or what kind of knowledge, experiences, conceptions we have about these ideas, and communicating those ideas through media to those policymakers who have no idea how climate change works or the how vaccine processes work or the vaccine development look like, because they come out of no background. So making them more literate, kind of framing it more of a contextual way would be helpful. And also these academicians can do more public facing writing. Public facing writing is more of writing for influential media outlets as an expert, because you know your work, you know the value, and you can communicate the possible best possible way to the lay audiences who don't know how the science work. So while we think about the roles and responsibilities and practices and these things into public policy making, because sometimes there is a policy sitting is a document, right? It's like they have a very nice policy on clean air, but nobody is talking about it, nobody covering it in the media, nobody asking questions about who came up with that document, for what, for whom, right? And until or unless we have a community together, which involves civil society, which involves academicians, journalists, politicians, businesses, communities, and like lay people in the society, we cannot come up with the solution which is appropriate, which is just, which is more inclusive. It, especially with the policies, because one policy can change a lot of things if it has been drafted and implemented justly, right? So these roles, I think, have been redefined and have been in the talks recently. That's what I think, the bigger role. Journalists are the best storytellers. People, they can tell the stories, right? Like they bring things into the context through visuals, through words. So they have a bigger responsibilities. But when we think about our part of the world in the South Asian context, media is not like, they don't have a 300 years of history of media. They're still learning, they're still on nascent stages, and they have a lot of pressures. There are press freedom issues, there's a lot of literacy issues, like overall media literacy issues, or overall the journalists who are coming to the profession, they're just coming out of a straight arts and background, not coming from environmental sciences background. They're not coming from finance background where they become financial, economic reporters or things like that. So that region again, in terms of journalism, in terms of academicians, they have a different uh, kind of not conception, but like problems and hurdles and difficulties, which kind of becomes more another layer of challenges for them to communicate these ideas to policymakers.
Hi, my name is Srivi Ramasubramanian. I'm the director of CodeShift, the collaboratory for data equity, social healing, inclusive futures, and transformation. Thanks for watching Chai with Srivi.